like to thank all the leadership that have joined us today. All protocols are observed for the leadership of the Kaman Traditional Council, Paramount Chief Martinez of the San and Khoi Kingdom Council of Southern Africa, Dr. Reverend Busak, Paramount Chief of the Goringhaicona, the Goringhaicona that has been present under Bia Bradley Francis, all our leaders, the Princess Shanae of the Griquas, who is present representing Paramount Chief Peeling, and to all the leadership that have been present, just to say cake and guns, and to confirm that this is an issue that is not an issue about one person. It is an issue of a nation, and that our nation is responding accordingly in terms of a collective history that is under threat, a heritage that speaks to our consciousness on an epicenter of liberation and resistance. Today we heard the call once again for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the San and Khoi, where we can deal with the intergenerational hurt, the trauma, and the seeds of discontent that still haunt us day to day as tributary, descendant, creolized African communities that are posited in and around our country, especially in the Western Cape. The battle of the two rivers is one that extends to the concrete jungles of the Cape Flats, to the living descendants of a genocide that has been committed, the ethnocide and epistemological violence that still continues unabated. When the call for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission is made, it is one that brings right to the center the issue of dignity and respect. And while we are embroiled in a protracted and complex and heartfelt series of court cases, and currently we are looking at how we will respond to the recent one, what is undeniable and what is very clear is that the heritage is not for sale, that we are not for sale. And what is spoken today in many ways by the leaders too that have been present is the fact that while we fight this legally, there are those that have made an announcement. The First Nations Collective made an announcement, Zenzile Khoisan made an announcement yesterday and today, saying that all the indigenous leaders that are against the development are not legitimate. So we are illegitimate. Now, it doesn't take the court of law or it doesn't take history to determine perhaps what are the factors behind a statement like that. But I think what must be made very clear is that just because one does not support a 4.5 billion rand development does not mean that we are not legitimate. It does not mean that the future and the present of the San and Khoi is now being determined by the consent of 150,000 square meters of concrete bulk on a floodplain, where the old Liesbeek river, an actual being, has been infilled on the site. And what is interesting is that there is a river called the Liesbeek River, but as it enters onto the private property, it's actually redefined as a stormwater ditch. So the example of what happens to something that is sacred, that moves into private property in an area where the notion of private property in our country began. In a precinct where Jan van Riebeeck put up his dividing fence, which was the first palisaded and then thorny bushable fence that divided our communities, where permits were started in the first instance, where forced removal started in the first instance, that precipitated into the first Khoi-Dutch War in 1659, and from which over 200 years of wars of liberation and resistance, genocide occurred. And we are asking for that word too to become something that is recognized. One thing for sure is that for anyone to want to say that we are not legitimate, the response is clear. We are not your coloureds. I am not your coloured. We are not your coloureds. And I am not your coloured. That term in 1913 took away the vestige and the meaning of my ancestors. Again deployed in the 1950s to choose who was going to be forcefully removed, where, how and what. And now again you might have those who may feel that it's good for you just to be a coloured. For those who are against the development are just a bunch of coloureds. That is a form of gross spiritual violence. And it is said without our consent. No one has the right to determine who we are. No one has the right to determine how I define myself as an African. And as long as the San and Khoi is placed in the center of the debate, the notion of an African Renaissance will forever remain in its nascent stage. And as we move closer and closer to get rid of this notion of colour, a term that, like a yoke around a person's neck, distances one's sense of belonging in terms of the ownership of the river, of the cosmos, of ritual and of land, but also in terms of our own proximity to ourselves and to the love of our ancestors, and for the right, as Bear Bradley said, to love ourselves, to love one another. The impact of 360 years of forms of hatred, hatred for each other, hatred for ourselves. What we are announcing is it is our time to heal. We are going to push for healing because this is what we need. We must become a healing nation, and with the San and Khoi we will ensure that the policy of healing is the number one policy on our country, and the policy of healing is the number one policy in this province, because we share the worst statistics of violence around the world among any other nation. And when we place the beauty and the poetry of indigenous knowledge systems right in the center to say that we have the right to heal, and we have the right to love, and the right to be human, and the right to have dignity, and the right to memory, and the right to our ancestors, and the right for a river that must flow, a mountain that must be seen, then we become full and human again. And that is ultimately what we are pushing for. And that is ultimately what we will hold hands with each other from now till eternity. Amen. The City of Cape Town, the Western Cape Government, the Liesbeek Leisure Property Trust have formed an axis that agree on a certain notion of what heritage is, to the point where the world's largest company, which is the anchor tenant, has built a Berlin Wall on the place where our people were divided in the first instance in 1657. Built a Berlin Wall that is separating our communities in ways that are vicious, and unkind, built a wall where there are now two sides of this river, when in fact we are one people. And that wall must be torn down. We would also like to take the opportunity to thank our greatest ally among us, the people of Observatory, the Observatory Civic Association, the environmental groups, civil society, the fact that this campaign is intersectional. It is a beautiful campaign because if ever you would want to look at a rainbow nation, this campaign is it. Ethno-nationalist, racist forms of divisiveness are not something that this campaign tolerates. It's because this is a collective history that belongs to everyone and led by the San and Khoi. But it is shared and it belongs to all. And we are very proud of that. We're very proud of how we express ourselves in this way. Not out of hate, not out of racism or xenophobia, but out of a collective sense of knowing that what we are doing is right and that we're moving towards something that will place a World Heritage site for our healing, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for our healing, but ultimately to show that of the oldest people who have also been the most brutalized, that out of this can come something that will be the biggest fountain of love and forgiveness and of healing, not just for us, but something that we hold in tandem with other indigenous communities around the world. And we look to them too, to help us shape a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that we do not perhaps make the same mistakes that have been made before. And that we, with open arms, look in a way that through a decolonial framework of meaningful participation, perhaps we can show the city and show the province and show people what is a decolonial, meaningful framework of participation that appreciates consent and dignity is in the center. So with that, I'll call back Supreme Senior Chief just to conclude. Hi, Goringhaicona, guys.